and welcome to Bygone Traditions. I'm Ginger, and today we are going to can this ground beef. I will be canning this ground beef in an onion soup mix. The first step we need to do is make sure that all of our jars are washed and cleaned. I right now, and I'm sure you can hear the noise, have my jars in the dishwasher cleaning, and that will keep my jars hot. I also have washed the rings of the jars, and I have a bowl ready with my lids in it for when it is time to put hot water in that bowl to get the lids ready. I will fill my canner 2 to 3 inches full of water. Actually, we'll do 3 inches of water this time because the processing time on the ground beef is 90 minutes, and so that's a pretty long time. So you want to make sure you have enough water in your canner that it doesn't boil dry. So let's get started. I'm going to show you how I brown my ground beef. So the first thing I've done was get about 30 cups of the onion soup mix and water together. So what it is a tablespoon of onion soup mix per cup of water. And so I have 30 tablespoons of onion soup mix in this plus 30 cups of water. And that's what I'm going to use to fill my jars. Okay, so I have about 24 pounds of ground beef right here. And in another container here, I don't think you can see, it's kind of out of the shot. And I'm just going to ground them in these 2 pans, cook them in these 2 pans, and then I will place them in this large bowl that I have here. And then when I am done, I'll fill the jars. I have heated my pans to about, oops, not this one, to about a medium heat. And now I'm going to start browning my meat. So what I have here is about, all together, I have the 2 pans of ground beef, this pan, and there's a pan right here that you can't see. I have about 24 pounds. This is going to fill about 12 to 16 jars. A quart jar holds around 2 pounds of ground beef. So a pint would hold about a pound. So you would just fill the appropriate size jar for your family. You know, our family's a little bit larger, so we usually use about 2 pounds of ground beef when I make anything like spaghetti or burritos or a lasagna. 2 pounds is about what we use. If there's any extra, I can just stick it in the fridge and use it for another day. But it's a nice, quick way to put your lasagna together. You don't have to end up cooking the ground beef. All you're cooking is the noodles. I mean, obviously you want to heat it up a little bit, but it's not remembering to pull the meat out of the freezer and let it thaw and all of that stuff. So this just makes it a little easier and a lot more convenient. I'm going to get all of this browned, and I will come back to you when I am ready to put these in the jar. Okay, so once you have the meat browned, you're going to want to strain the meat and get all the fat out, and then I'm going to put it in this bowl. So I'm going to strain this. Like that. We are going to put these in quart-sized jars with a 1-inch headspace, and we will fill with the onion soup mix that I am prepared here. And then I will put the lids on, and we will put them in the canner. My canner right now is filled with 3 inches of water plus a 1/4 cup of vinegar. The vinegar helps keep that calcium buildup from getting on your jars, which is nearly impossible to get off without using hot water and vinegar, and it's just a lot of work. And so it just keeps your jars clean and pretty and looking nice on your shelf. I also have my vinegar here to wipe the rims of my jars off with, and I have my ladle For the onion soup mix, I have my funnel to fill the jars with, and I have my debubbler to get all the air bubbles out of the jar, and my lids. Now I'm going to put hot boiling water over these lids in just a moment, and I'll be right back. Okay, my boiling water is ready for my lids. Just gonna pour this over. Splishy splashy. Over my lids. And that'll sit there while I fill my jars. Okay, so about 2 pounds should fit in a quart-sized jar. We're going to a 1-inch headspace here. Well, looks like we're going to have burritos tonight. Just set that aside. Okay, so now it's time to get the onion soup mix in the jars. Get the lids on and get them in the canner. You always want to debubble your jars because the air in there can trap bacteria in there that the heat won't be able to get to. So you always debubble these jars to get the trapped air out. It also helps you make sure you have the correct headspace, because if you air bubbles in here, it could look fuller than it is. So when you debubble your jars, the air releases and sometimes the water level or the liquid level lowers. So you want to make sure you have the correct headspace here so that you do not have faulty seals. A faulty seal is no fun because you put all this hard work into canning your food and then you skip a step, like you don't debubble it or you don't clean the rims, and both of those things can cause a faulty seal on your jar, and then you have to use the food right away and you don't get to store the food on your shelf for another day. And the whole purpose of this is to have shelf-stable food that you don't have to freeze. It's on your shelf. You're not using electricity to store it. So it's saving you money. It's saving you space for the most part. I mean, you do need a place for your jars. I use bookshelves for that with a spring rod and a curtain on it to keep the light out. And that seems to work really well. Yeah, always debubble your jars. Always clean the rims of your jars with vinegar. The vinegar helps cut the grease. So like, you know, meat is pretty greasy. Oops. And it helps clean that grease right off the rims. It also, if you have a sticky food that you're canning, it can get that sticky food right off the rims, and it just cleans your rims really well and keeps your jars from not sealing. It's just a very important step. That's why I like having canned food. It also frees up space in the freezer. You know, sometimes a whole cow takes up a whole freezer and then I don't have room for other things. And that's important. You know, I have a little bit of a bigger family. I have 3 kids at home. I have 4 kids, but one of them's moved out. And I'm sure eventually, well, eventually the rest of them are going to move out. They're older and just waiting until they can afford to move out. My youngest is 16, so she's with me for a little while longer, but she's almost 17. She'll be 17 in July. And so everybody's kind of flying the coop and doing their thing, which is how it should be. I will miss them terribly when they're gone. but I am trying to enjoy them while they're here. But so far, right now, we have 5 people in this house that I cook for, and they're all grown adults, so we eat quite a bit for dinner. Everybody's at work for lunch except me and my husband. My husband works from home, and so we're home for lunch, and my 16-year-old is home for lunch because I homeschool her. But sometimes she goes to work and she isn't home, so you know, it's just been less and less food, so I imagine we'll start going through less. I just want to make sure these are really clean because it was pretty greasy. Less food here soon. My oldest son, he's 22, and he'll probably move out in a year. It's kind of sad, but you know, I'm happy for him. He's moving on, and you know, with his life and becoming an adult, and I'm really proud of him. He's doing such a great job. I just can't wait to see where life takes my kids. So I'm using the Tattler Lids again today. I usually use these. It's rare that I don't. I usually do not use them for broth. So when I can broth, I'll use the ball lids. I think I've said that before. I don't know why, I just don't feel comfortable. I'm sure it's the same as canning meat with the Tattler Lids. I'm just afraid that the broth is, if it siphons out, it's going to really be a bad seal. And broth is can be pretty fatty and difficult to clean off the rim of your jar. So, okay, I'm ready to put these in the canner and get the canner going. So it looks like I got, I think, 13 jars. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, 13. I'll put the rack in here now. Now I'm going to take my lid and look through that hole. Let's see, is it clear? I think so. Yep, it's clear. So then we can put this lid on the canner. I'm going to match the arrow up with this line right here. Perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to make this edge here even all the way around, and then I will tighten down the wing nuts. And we'll be good to go. You want to make sure that you're tightening them down evenly, so if one is looser than the other, tighten the one that's a little looser until they're both at even pressure, and then you can tighten them down together so you don't lose your gap. You want this gap to stay even all the way around. I do the opposite. Don't need to tighten them too tight, otherwise you can't unscrew them. I've had that happen. Okay, looks good, looks pretty even. I'm gonna make sure it's even all the way around. You want it even because you don't want any steam escaping through the lid, because you want this to build up pressure properly. So you keep it even all the way around, keep this gap even all the way around. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this heat up to a medium high and wait for this to start venting. Once this is venting, we'll let it vent for 10 minutes, and then we will put our weighted gauge on. Now I am at sea level, so I am going to have 10 pounds of pressure. If you are above 1,000 feet, you will go to 15 pounds of pressure for this particular canner. Okay, so while I'm waiting for that to vent, I want to talk about a few things. Now, a lot of people have a fear of their pressure canner blowing up. Pressure canning nowadays is much safer than it used to be. There are what's called petcock valves and just a rubber gaskets that will blow before anything else happens. Once those blow, it releases all the steam. There's no pressure left in your canner, and there is no way to blow up that canner. Now, the older canners do not have so many of the safety valves, and that is why you have heard stories from your grandparents probably of pressure canners blowing up. And I just want to ease your fears and let you know that that's not really a possibility anymore. The other fear that people have is the fear of poisoning their family or giving them botulism and killing them. So I just want to ease your fears on that. It is 100% avoidable. Low acid foods can grow bacteria, but as long as you follow directions, that won't be an issue. Following proper techniques and proper times will avoid that completely. Microbiology has changed in the last 150 years, and we now understand that food needs to be heated to a certain temperature for a certain amount of time, depending on the acid level of the food. Yeast, molds, and bacteria will grow when you aren't following proper guidelines. Yeast and mold won't kill you, but they may make you very sick. The bacteria called C. botulinum is what can kill you, causing botulism. This only occurs in low acid foods or foods that are above 4.6 on the pH scale. We pressure can low acid foods because you must get the temperature of the food higher than water bath canning can get it. Water bath canning will only get the temperature to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, where with pressure canning we can get the temperature range between 240 and 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and that is the ideal range to kill off the C. botulinum bacteria. This is 100% preventable if you follow the proper guidelines for canning your food. Any issues that have come up with botulism has been found to be because of improper canning techniques. So, if you follow the proper techniques, your canned food will be very safe for you and your family. There are two different types of pressure canners. There's the dial gauge canner. This pressure canner has a dial that you will see where your pressure is at. You won't be using as much pressure using a dial gauge canner because your pressure can be fine-tuned better than a weighted gauge canner can. You will have to take that canner in and get the gauge checked every year at your local extension office. There's also a rubber gasket ring that goes around to seal the lid of the canner and the canner itself to keep that pressure inside the canner. That ring typically needs to be replaced about once a year. So that is very important. It is extremely important you get the gauge checked because you want your canner to be accurate. It is extremely important your canner is accurate to kill off the bacteria. So you must not skip the step of getting that gauge checked yearly at your local extension office. Now, there's also the weighted gauge canner, which is what I use. This canner, the gauge is always accurate. You never have to get it checked because it uses basic physics to read the pressure in the canner. This type of canner also does not have a rubber gasket. It is a metal-to-metal seal, and so you do not have to purchase a rubber gasket for it every year, which is nice. The one thing about this canner is the pressure only increases in increments of 5. So you're not able to pressure can jars at any lower pressure than 5, 10, or 15. But to me, that is not an inconvenience at all compared to having to replace the gasket or have it checked yearly to make sure the gauge is working. So let's go over a little bit of food safety, pressure canning safety. So any food naturally below 4.6 on the pH scale is in a range that won't let bacteria grow. It's a pretty safe range. Things like fruit and pickles have vinegar added, and tomatoes have a little extra acid added to it so it can be canned in a water bath canner. Tomatoes are like that. You add the vinegar to the tomatoes because it's right at that midpoint where it's not quite safe if you don't add that vinegar to it or lemon juice to it. Foods above 4.6 do not have enough acid to control the bacteria. Things like yeast and mold will die very easily in boiling water temperature, but many bacteria need a higher temperature to kill it off. So if a food does not have enough acid to kill off those bacteria, then we need a higher temperature. That way we will know the food is safe when it goes on the shelf. To do that, we use a steam method in a pressure chamber, or what we know as a pressure canner. This allows us to get the temperature up to that 240, 250 degree Fahrenheit range, thereby killing off the bad bacteria. The thickness of your food also plays an important role in considering what to can and what not to can. For your food to heat up uniformly so you can kill off all the yeast, mold, and bacteria, you need to make sure that the liquid can move and the heat can move through your jars. There are some things that have been removed from the safe canning list because of this. Now, some things that are unsafe to can are things like dairy products because there is not enough information on dairy to can safely. Oil. Oil tends to coat things and can support the growth of bacteria. This does not include oil when you're sauteing your food to prepare it. It includes canning foods in just oil. It does not have a good enough heat transfer to transfer the heat through the entire jar in order to kill off that bacteria. Cornstarch, clear gel, or any other starchy thickeners, that starch will interfere with the heat transfer during the process. There are just a few approved recipes with some of these thickeners. Just stick with those. There are a couple of recipes for pie filling that are approved recipes. You can thicken the soups and sauces when you go to use the canned food instead. One of the recipes I enjoy making I use, I think it's called clear gel, is a apple pie filling, and I love that recipe. Now you can use that one because the thickener does not thicken up until after the product starts to cool. And then it will thicken up to a really great consistency. So it does allow for that heat transfer to happen throughout that entire jar. You also do not want to can pasta or rice. These will also interfere with the heat transfer, so you would just add them to your food after reheating your canned food. You do not want to use very dense purees. Because the food is so dense, it will keep the heat from getting to the center of the food, keeping it from killing off the bacteria. Breads and cakes in a jar. The way that these are processed does not kill the bacteria in the jar, and there are not any canning recipes that have been approved for this to be safe or to know if it's safe. Tender products such as cauliflower, broccoli, summer squash, and eggplant. Because of the temperature required to can these, if you're just canning them alone, say you're not putting them in a soup or in a sauce, so it's okay if it's mushy. If you want to can them because you want to maybe roast them later, it's better off if you freeze them because they do not hold their shape. They will turn to mush, and it's just no good. You can pickle them. They won't turn to mush in that sense, but They have to be pressure canned when you are canning them by themselves if you're not pickling them, and they will just turn into a soupy mess. Now, if your goal is to put it in a sauce, it's totally fine. It does really well in sauces and pickling. The processing time and method of canning always needs to be considered. This way your jars of food are always safe. It is really important to follow the approved recipes. The very first thing you need to consider is your elevation. Water boils at different temperatures at higher elevations. You will need to adjust your canning process based on your elevation, either by time or pressure, depending on the method of canning you will be using. Remember that all recipes are written for sea level. If you live above 1,000 feet, you will need to adjust appropriately. Google Earth can tell you your elevation, or you can go to a website called whatsmyelevation.com. Always make sure you use fresh food. For one thing, fresh is always better, and you won't ever be able to take that fresh food and put it in a jar and make it taste any better than it did right there on your counter. Another thing about food, if it is not fresh, is that you're going to be introducing more microorganisms into your food, and that is the thing we are trying to kill off. So, we want to use as fresh food as possible. You also want to make sure that everything is clean. Now, as long as you're processing your food for 10 minutes or more, whether you're water bath canning or pressure canning, you do not need to sterilize anything. However, you do need to wash it in hot soapy water and make sure that you have basic kitchen cleanliness in your kitchen. All your tools and utensils should be clean. Make sure you are using the correct headspace when filling your jars. Proper headspace will help you avoid all kinds of issues such as siphoning and unsealed jars and food getting under the rim of your jars. Make sure the rings of your jars are not dented or rusted. This canner is now at a full vent, so we're going to vent this for 10 minutes. I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes and then we will put the weighted gauge on. There are two ways to pack your jars. You will either raw pack your jars or hot pack your jars. When you use the raw pack method, you are packing raw, uncooked food into your jars and filling them with a hot liquid and then proceeding with the rest of the canning process. When you hot pack your jars, you are filling your jars with cooked food, either a vegetable that has been blanched or cooked food such as ground beef, like we did today, soups, chilies, sauces, etc. Then adding a hot liquid and proceeding with the rest of the canning process. There are benefits to both ways of packing your food in a jar, but some foods are better one way over the other. The size of your jar is an important aspect of canning your food. Sometimes there are certain foods that cannot be canned in a larger sized jar because the size of the jar will not allow for proper heat transfer in that jar. And you can always decrease the size, but you can never assume that you can increase the size of the jar and remain safe. Make sure you check your recipe. Okay, this has been venting for 10 minutes, so now we are going to put this weighted gauge on at the 10 and wait for it to come up to pressure. Now I just want to do a quick recap here. Proper canning involves getting food in the jars, sealing the jar and processing to kill any microorganisms in your jar so your food remains shelf stable and safe in the pantry. 2. Fruits and pickles are high acid. These are safely processed in a water bath canner at boiling temperatures. Non-pickled veggies, meats, or a combo of these things are low acid and need a higher temperature, so they need to be pressure canned. This brings the temperature up to that 240-250 degree Fahrenheit range instead of the water bath temperature of 212 degrees Fahrenheit, thereby killing off any of the hardier microorganisms that are in the lower acid foods. Now, Headspace. The gap between the food in your jar and the lid of the jar, that is what Headspace is. This will give you a better seal rates, less food seepage out of the jar, and an overall better experience with less issues if you have the correct headspace. There are two ways to fill your jar, raw pack and hot pack. Raw pack is cold, uncooked food covered in a hot liquid. Hot pack is hot, cooked, or blanched food covered in a hot liquid. There are benefits to both, but some foods preserve better one way over the other. Some foods are in the in-between range in acid, close to low acid, but not low enough on the pH scale to be safe. To make this safe, all you would have to do is add an acid to correct this. You would add something like citric acid, vinegar, or lemon juice. To acidify it correctly, the acid needs to be a standardized 5% solution. This is applicable to the vinegar and the lemon juice. Homemade versions of these tend to have varying solution, so for safe canning use, purchase bottled lemon juice or vinegar that has a 5% solution. Some things can only be canned in a specific size jar in order to be safe and allow the heat to move through the jar properly and consistently. You can always decrease the size of the jar, but you can never assume that you can increase the size of the jar and keep your food safe. Most common sizes of jars that will cover all of your needs for canning are half pints, pints, and quarts. Okay, this is up to pressure. It is rattling quite fast. You really only need it to rattle about 4 times per minute. This is going quite a bit faster than that, so I'm going to gently and carefully turn the heat down, wait a few minutes, see if that pressure starts to regulate a little bit better, and then we will start our timer. So that pressure has regulated quite a bit. So I'm going to start the timer for 90 minutes. Okay, that timer's been set for 90 minutes. So it is very important that your food is processed for the entire length of time that is listed in the recipe. Always make sure you adjust for elevation. Water bath canning will need an adjustment for time, and pressure canning will need an adjustment for pressure. If the temperature drops at any time during the process, the water stops boiling with the water bath canner, or the pressure drops below the listed pressure, you will need to correct the situation by returning the process to the correct temperature and begin the timing process all over again. This is very important for the safety of the food. Okay, this has been going for 90 minutes now, and so I can turn the heat off. So the canner has now come down to 0 pressure, so I can remove this valve. We will now wait for another 10 minutes. This has been sitting here for 10 minutes, so I am going to unscrew the wing nuts and crack the lid, and we'll wait another 15 minutes, and then we can pull the jars out. This one's always getting stuck. I'll be back in 15 minutes. So it's been 15 minutes, so we can take off the lid. Remember to always remove the lid away from you so you do not get burned by the steam. So here we go. Goes this way. Here we go. All our beautiful jars of ground beef. Oof. Okay, so I'm using Tattler Lids, so I've got to pull these straight out of the canner and then tighten the lids down. Okay, so I removed all the jars. Tomorrow I will clean the jars and label them and put them away in my pantry. I hope you enjoyed learning about food safety when canning and how to can ground beef, and I hope to see you next time.